If you had met me 5 years ago, you'd probably have called me an ordinary man living an ordinary life. Married for almost a decade, father of two, assistant manager in a mid-sized firm, a modest house in the suburbs, the kind of setup that looks picture perfect on paper. I believed I was content. I told myself that routine was the same as peace, that comfort meant happiness. Looking back now, I realize that was the first lie I ever told myself. My wife, Aisha, is a good woman. Patient, loyal, practical. She never cared for grand gestures. She cared that I showed up, for the bills, the kids' school meetings, the occasional weekend drive to her parents' house. But over time, our conversations had shrunk to logistics. Did you pay the gas bill? Did you pick up milk? What time will you be home? We stopped talking about dreams. Or rather, I stopped listening to them. There's a kind of silence that doesn't shout. It just hums quietly every day until it becomes part of the wallpaper. That was my home life. I didn't hate it, but I didn't feel alive in it either. I began to mistake boredom for suffocation, responsibility for imprisonment. I didn't know it then, but I was standing on the edge of a cliff and pretending it was solid ground. Then came Sarah. She joined our company as a project coordinator, new, energetic, quick to laugh. She had that quality of making everyone in the room feel noticed. I still remember the first time she asked me a question during a team meeting. I over-explained, fumbling with my words like a schoolboy. When she smiled in response, something inside me sparked, something that had been asleep for years. At first it was harmless, or so I thought. Coffee break chats about work turned into shared jokes, then small confidences, her struggles with her husband, my complaints about office politics. She was married too, with one little boy. When she spoke of her home life, there was a flicker of sadness in her eyes that mirrored my own. That similarity became our first bond, a silent understanding that we were both missing something we couldn't quite name. It's frightening how easily emotional intimacy can disguise itself as friendship. You tell yourself you're just talking, just helping, just being kind. You don't notice when you start dressing a bit better on the days you know you'll see her, or when you start checking your phone a little too often, waiting for a message. Each tiny step feels innocent on its own. Put them together, and you're already crossing lines. I still remember the day she called me during lunch break. "Can we talk somewhere private?" she said. Her voice trembled, and I thought something was wrong. We met in the parking lot, sat in her car. She had been arguing with her husband the night before. She cried. I listened, and when she looked up at me with tears in her eyes, something snapped. I held her hand to comfort her, and that simple touch changed everything. It lingered too long, carried too much meaning. Neither of us said it, but we both felt it. That invisible current, that dangerous warmth. After that day, I couldn't think straight. I'd wake up checking my phone, wondering if she'd messaged. I'd rush to the office not out of duty, but out of hunger, to see her smile, to hear her voice. I told myself it was nothing serious, just a harmless distraction, a midlife flutter that would fade. But desire has a way of growing in the dark. The more I tried to hide it, the stronger it became. At home, I started withdrawing. Aisha noticed. "You seem distracted lately," she said one night as we sat in bed. I lied, something about workload, new projects. She nodded, half convinced, and turned off the light. The guilt burned quietly inside me, but the thrill drowned it out. In those early weeks, I still thought I could keep both worlds separate, the respectable family man and the secret admirer. I didn't realize that once you open the door to deceit, it never closes fully again. You keep finding new reasons to justify the next step, the next lie, until the truth becomes unrecognizable. Looking back, that was the calm before the storm, the last stretch of innocence before I lost control of everything I cared about. If I could go back to that version of me, sitting in the office cafeteria, laughing at Sarah's jokes, I would shake him and tell him that no moment of excitement is worth the wreckage it leaves behind. But of course, life doesn't give warnings that sound loud enough. Sometimes they come as whispers, and I ignored every single one. The first time we kissed wasn't planned. Nothing ever is. It happened on a Thursday evening in late November. The office was half empty. Most people had already gone home. Sarah and I were finalizing a report when the power flickered off for a moment. Just a short outage. But in that darkness, something shifted. She laughed nervously, and when the lights came back on, our faces were too close. I saw the hesitation in her eyes, the same fear that was pulsing in my chest. And then it happened. Quick, trembling, almost accidental. But once it did, the world felt different. I remember driving home afterward in complete silence. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I kept replaying that moment, both terrified and exhilarated. I told myself it was a mistake, that it would never happen again. I even rehearsed how I'd apologize the next day, but when I saw her again, all my resolutions collapsed. She smiled, that small, knowing smile, and I knew we were already too far gone. We started meeting outside work. At first, it was just coffee after office hours, then dinner, then long drives where we didn't talk much, just sat together, music playing, the city lights flickering past. I told myself I deserved this small piece of happiness, that I had sacrificed enough for everyone else. She told me she hadn't felt seen in years. Between us grew an intoxicating blend of comfort and danger. Affairs aren't like in the movies. They don't start with passion, they start with loneliness. You convince yourself you're filling an emotional void, that you've found someone who understands. The truth is uglier. You're just running from the parts of yourself you don't want to face. We kept it hidden well. Separate phones, coded messages, lunch breaks stretched into stolen hours. I learned to lie with precision, to my wife, my children, my colleagues. I began to live two parallel lives, each feeding on the other. The guilt was heavy, but the secrecy made it thrilling. It's strange how deceit can start to feel like a drug. Sarah and I promised each other that we wouldn't let it go too far. "We can't destroy what we already have," she would say. I agreed, even as I was already imagining what it would be like to wake up beside her every morning. The more we tried to draw boundaries, the more we crossed them. One night, after a late-night meeting that was nothing more than a cover, we ended up at a small hotel near the airport. The room was dimly lit, impersonal, safe in its anonymity. She sat on the edge of the bed, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "If we do this," she whispered, "there's no going back." I didn't answer. I just took her hand. That night, the line we had tiptoed around for months disappeared completely. The next morning, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my wife's face, my children's laughter, the life I was betraying. I told myself it would be the last time. It wasn't. The secrecy bound us tighter. Each stolen moment became harder to resist. For months, we lived in that shadowed space, not quite love, not quite lust, but something messy and consuming. We shared dreams, made plans, even talked about leaving our spouses someday, though both of us knew we probably never would. We were addicted to the idea of each other, not the reality. Then, little cracks began to appear. She started worrying that her husband suspected something. I became paranoid that Aisha would notice how often I was working late. Every phone vibration made my heart race. The guilt, once quiet, started screaming inside my head. and yet I couldn't stop. Each time I tried to pull away, she'd call in tears, saying she couldn't do this without me. I'd go running back, convincing myself I was helping her, when really, I was just feeding my own weakness. It's incredible how quickly deception becomes normal. I started resenting my family for asking simple things, dinner together, a movie night, because they pulled me away from her. I started wishing for traffic jams and canceled meetings so I could have more time to sneak a call. I wasn't living anymore. I was hiding. By the time spring came, the affair wasn't a secret to ourselves anymore. We both knew it had changed us, and not for the better. There was a heaviness in our smiles, a trembling in every goodbye. Something inside me began to sense that the balance was tipping, that secrets like ours don't stay buried forever. And I was right, because soon everything I had built, both lives, would come crashing down. There's a strange routine that develops when you live a double life. You learn how to compartmentalize, how to breathe in one world while holding your breath in the other. I used to think juggling work and family was difficult, but hiding an affair? That was a full-time job in itself. Every text, every call, every unexplained absence had to be covered with surgical precision. It was exhausting, and yet I couldn't stop. Sarah and I became masters of secrecy. We used an alternate SIM card to talk. We'd delete call logs and photos before going home. We'd meet in places far from our neighborhood, rented apartments, empty parks, late-night coffee shops that stayed open just long enough for us to pretend the world had disappeared. Those moments were intoxicating. Every stolen hour felt like a victory against monotony, a small rebellion against the life we were supposed to live. But the truth is, I was falling deeper into something that didn't belong to me. I began lying effortlessly. When Aisha asked why I smelled of a different perfume, I said a female colleague hugged me after getting promoted. When she asked why I was working on weekends, I said the company was pushing for deadlines. She believed me, or maybe she didn't want to believe otherwise. People often sense the truth long before they admit it to themselves. At home, I became distant. My children would jump into my lap, eager to tell me about school projects or cartoons, and I'd smile mechanically, my mind elsewhere. I was physically present but emotionally vacant. Aisha's patience started to crack. She'd say things like, "You don't look at me anymore," or "You're always distracted." I'd deflect, turn it into an argument, and storm out, using anger to hide my guilt. With Sarah, things weren't as light as before either. The thrill of secrecy began to rot into anxiety. She wanted more time, more assurance, more love. Her husband apparently had grown suspicious. She confessed that he'd once followed her car, that he'd checked her phone, that he'd started asking questions about her late hours. I felt the same dread creeping into my own home. Aisha had started noticing changes, my restlessness, the way I guarded my phone, the late-night calls I pretended were from clients. But in spite of all that, I couldn't let go. When I was with Sarah, the world felt electrified. She understood me, or at least, she understood the version of me I wanted to be, free, desirable, unburdened. With her, I wasn't the tired husband or the worried father. I was alive again. But that illusion came with a price, and I was paying for it with fragments of my soul. Then one evening, as we sat in a dim restaurant corner, she asked me the question that changed everything. "Would you ever leave Aisha for me?" I froze. It was a question I had avoided, even in my own thoughts. My silence said enough. She forced a smile, but I saw the pain behind it. "I'm tired of being your secret," she said softly. That night, when I got home, Aisha was sitting on the sofa, waiting. The TV was on mute. "You didn't pick up my calls," she said quietly. "Where were you?" I said something about a client meeting running late, but even to my own ears it sounded hollow. She stared at me, long, searching, heartbroken. "You're not here anymore," she whispered, "even when you are." I went to bed, pretending to sleep, but her words echoed in my head. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just lying, I was disappearing. The weeks that followed were tense. Sarah grew distant too. The guilt, the secrecy, the constant fear. It was eating both of us alive. Yet, every time I tried to end it, she'd break down, and I couldn't stand seeing her cry. I'd tell her we'd figure it out, that everything would be okay, though I had no idea how. Then came the message that set off the chain reaction. One evening, while having dinner with my family, my phone buzzed. Aisha picked it up before I could. It was Sarah. A simple message. "I miss you. When can I see you again?" The silence that followed was suffocating. My children were laughing over something at the table, oblivious, while Aisha stared at the screen. When our eyes met, I saw something in hers I had never seen before. Not anger, but devastation. She didn't say a word. She just placed the phone on the table and walked to the bedroom, closing the door behind her. That night, the house felt colder than ever. I sat alone at the dining table, my world collapsing in slow motion. I wanted to run after her, to explain, to beg. But what could I say? Every word would only expose another lie. For the first time, I understood what real fear felt like. Not fear of being caught, but fear of losing everything that ever mattered. And the worst part? The storm had only just begun. That night, Aisha didn't speak to me. Not a word. She slept on the edge of the bed, facing the wall, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds. The air between us felt heavy, poisoned by the truth that was now exposed. In the morning, she went about her routine, making breakfast for the kids, packing their lunch boxes. But not once did she look at me. I tried to speak, to explain, but the words tangled in my throat. When she finally turned to me, her voice was calm, too calm. "How long?" she asked. No shouting, no tears, just a cold, quiet question that sliced deeper than any anger could. I hesitated, which was answer enough. Her eyes filled with tears. "I gave you my trust," she whispered, "and you gave it away like it meant nothing." There's no way to describe the look of heartbreak in someone who has loved you for years. It's not just pain, it's disbelief, like watching the ground disappear under your feet. She didn't need more answers. She just nodded slowly and said, "I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to believe it." I begged her to listen. I told her it was a mistake, that I didn't mean for it to happen, that it was over. But even as I said those words, I knew how empty they sounded. "It's over?" she repeated bitterly. "Do you even know how many times I've heard that in other people's stories?" She walked away before I could answer. For the next few days, the house turned into a battlefield of silence. The kids noticed. They asked why Mom and Dad weren't talking, and I had no answer. I stayed late at work, not because I had to, but because I couldn't bear the guilt of sitting in that house, a home I had broken with my own hands. Meanwhile, Sarah's world was cracking too. Her husband Adil had found the same message thread. I never found out how. Maybe he'd checked her phone, or maybe he'd already known and was waiting for proof. Either way, one evening, Sarah called me in tears. "He knows," she said, her voice trembling. "He's furious. He said he's going to call your wife." My blood ran cold. Everything I had tried to keep separate was collapsing into one tangled mess. "Please," I said, "try to calm him down. Don't let him do that." But she was sobbing too hard to respond. That night, Aisha received a call. I didn't hear the conversation, but I could tell from her expression who it was. When she hung up, she looked at me like I was a stranger. "He told me everything," she said. "Everything you tried to hide." I wanted to deny it, to spin another lie, but what was the point? The truth had already burned through every layer of deceit I'd built. The next morning, she packed a bag and took the children to her parents' house. She didn't scream, didn't curse. She just left quietly, and that silence was the loudest thing I've ever heard. For days afterward, I wandered through the empty rooms like a ghost. Every object felt like an accusation. The framed family photo on the mantel, the half-finished school projects on the table, her perfume still lingering in the air. The house felt too large, too hollow, echoing with memories that now hurt to remember. Sarah called constantly. Her husband had thrown her out. She was staying at a friend's place, terrified of losing custody of her son. "We ruined everything," she said one night between sobs. "I don't even know who I am anymore." At first I tried to comfort her, but each call just deepened the guilt. She had lost her family. I had lost mine. We were bound together by destruction. What had once felt like love now looked like wreckage, two people clinging to each other in the ruins of their own choices. My parents found out soon after. My mother's voice broke when she said, "What did we do wrong raising you?" My father couldn't even look at me. Friends I'd known for years stopped calling. At work, whispers followed me through the hallways. Someone must have leaked what had happened. Sarah eventually resigned. I avoided her after that. We both knew there was nothing left to save. One evening, about a week later, Aisha came back to the house, not to reconcile, but to collect the rest of her things. I tried to apologize, to promise I'd change, but she stopped me mid-sentence. "You didn't just cheat on me," she said. "You betrayed our children's trust. You made them question what love means." Those words shattered whatever denial I had left. I realized that affairs don't just destroy marriages, they destroy legacies. They make even the good memories feel tainted. When she left that evening with the last box, I stood at the doorway long after the car disappeared. The silence in that house was unbearable. I had wanted excitement, passion, something to make me feel alive. And all I was left with was emptiness. The week after Aisha left felt like walking through a world drained of color. I went to work mechanically, came home to a house that no longer felt like home, and stared at the walls until sleep finally dragged me under. Every sound seemed too loud, every silence unbearable. Guilt sat on my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. People at work looked at me differently. The news had spread. Quietly, of course, but gossip moves faster than truth ever does. Colleagues who once joked with me now avoided my eyes. Some looked at me with pity, others with judgment. The worst part was knowing I had earned every bit of it. Sarah had stopped calling as often. When she did, it wasn't out of affection anymore. It was desperation. Her husband, Adil, had filed for separation. He had told her parents everything. She'd lost not just her marriage, but her home and most of her social circle. She said she didn't blame me, but I could hear the resentment in her voice. "We destroyed everything," she kept saying. "And for what? For moments we can't even remember without shame." I tried to comfort her, but what could I say? That I still cared? That somehow, beneath the wreckage, I still loved her? It all sounded meaningless. What had once felt like escape now felt like a trap. We had nowhere to go. Not back, not forward. Just circles of regret. A few days later, Aisha called. Her voice was formal, distant. "The kids want to see you," she said. "You can come this weekend." It was the first time she'd spoken to me since leaving. I drove to her parents' house with trembling hands. When my children ran out to hug me, I broke down. They didn't understand why Mom and Dad weren't living together anymore. My daughter asked, "Daddy, are you still angry at Mommy?" And I couldn't answer. Aisha stayed inside, watching from the doorway. She didn't say a word while I played with the kids, but when it was time to leave, she asked quietly, "Was she worth it?" That question haunted me long after I left. Because deep down, I knew the answer. No one is worth the destruction of trust, the pain of betrayal, the innocence of children caught in the crossfire. Days turned into weeks. Sarah's life spiraled further. Adil had shown screenshots of our messages to her family. They wanted nothing to do with her. She was staying in a small rented apartment, struggling to find work, trying to get visitation rights for her son. When she called me one evening, her voice was hollow. "He won't let me see him," she whispered. "He says I don't deserve to be a mother." I sat there in silence, feeling the full weight of what we had done. "I'm sorry," I said. "For everything." She started crying, and in that moment I realized something I hadn't before. We had used each other to escape our unhappiness, but in doing so, we had multiplied it tenfold. We had burned down 2 families to light a fire that couldn't last. I tried to help her financially. I sent money, offered support, but she refused. "It won't fix anything," she said. "It'll just remind me of everything I lost." Eventually, she stopped picking up my calls. I think she needed to disappear, to build something new without the ghost of us haunting her. I understood. We had already taken too much from each other. One evening, I sat alone in the living room, the same room that once echoed with my children's laughter, and looked at the family photo on the wall. Aisha's smile, my hand on her shoulder, the kids in front. It looked so normal, so happy, and I realized that while I'd been chasing excitement, I'd already had something extraordinary. Love that was steady, faithful, and real. I just hadn't seen it. The discovery of my affair hadn't just ended 2 marriages, it had ended 2 versions of ourselves. The people we had been before it all began, the trusting spouses, the loving parents, no longer existed. What remained were shells, haunted by what-ifs and memories that hurt too much to hold. A month later, I received divorce papers. I stared at them for hours before signing. It felt like signing away a lifetime, like erasing every moment of laughter and warmth we'd once shared. When I returned the papers, Aisha didn't say a word. Her silence was her goodbye. Sarah finalized her divorce around the same time. She got shared custody, but I heard later that her son didn't want to visit her. "He's still angry," she told me once, "but maybe someday he'll understand." I didn't have the heart to tell her that children rarely forget that kind of pain. By then, I had stopped trying to contact her. Every conversation only reopened wounds that wouldn't heal. We became 2 strangers bound by a past we both wanted to forget. And yet, sometimes late at night, I still think about her, not with longing, but with sorrow. Because no matter how it started, how intoxicating it once felt, it ended in ashes. I used to think discovery was the worst part, the moment of exposure, the loss of everything. But I learned that what follows is worse. The slow realization that you can't undo what's been done, that some mistakes live with you forever. In the months that followed, time seemed to move differently, slower, heavier. I would wake up every morning to silence, a kind of quiet that no sound could fill. The absence of Aisha's voice, the echo of my children's laughter, it all hung in the air like a punishment that never ended. I had once wished for solitude, now it was my only companion. Work kept me occupied but not fulfilled. I buried myself in projects, staying late every evening just to avoid going home to that hollow space. The colleagues who still spoke to me did so out of politeness. The rest had quietly written me off. I had become that man, the one whose name people whispered in corridors, the cautionary tale behind forced smiles. Weekends were the hardest. That's when the memories came alive. Family picnics, movie nights, small jokes Aisha used to make. I'd open the photo gallery on my phone and scroll through pictures I couldn't bring myself to delete. Every smile in those photos was a reminder of how carelessly I'd thrown it all away. When I met the kids again a few months later, they seemed older, not in age, but in the way they looked at me. There was hesitation now, a kind of guardedness I had never seen before. My son clung to Aisha's hand while my daughter spoke softly, as if afraid to say the wrong thing. They weren't angry, not yet, but I could sense the distance forming, invisible but growing each day. Aisha didn't speak to me much during those visits. She was civil, composed, almost peaceful. She had started working again and seemed to have built a rhythm for herself and the kids. Seeing her so strong, so unshaken, filled me with both pride and shame. I had shattered her world, and somehow she had rebuilt it piece by piece, without me. I, on the other hand, was still living in the debris of my choices. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. The first message, the first kiss, the first lie. The mind has a cruel way of preserving the very things you wish you could forget. Sarah had vanished from my life completely. I heard through a mutual colleague that she'd moved to another city and started working for a smaller firm. I didn't try to contact her. What would be the point? We had both done enough damage. Every time I thought of her, it wasn't with anger or longing. It was with exhaustion. We had burned too brightly, and like all things that burn too fast, we had turned to ash. Over time, I began to see how fragile morality really is. People think affairs happen because someone is wicked or heartless. The truth is more complex. They happen because two broken people mistake each other for escape routes. Because for a fleeting moment, you feel seen, desired, alive, and you mistake that feeling for love. But love doesn't destroy. It doesn't lie or hide in shadows. What we had was not love. It was hunger disguised as connection. Months turned into a year. The divorce was finalized. I moved to a smaller apartment across town. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal. It wasn't a home. It was a reminder of what home used to be. Sometimes, when I'd pass by the park where Aisha and I once took the kids, I'd see families laughing together. I'd stop and watch for a few seconds, then turn away because the ache in my chest became unbearable. One evening, Aisha called unexpectedly. "The kids want you to come to my father's birthday dinner," she said. Her tone was calm, polite, but not warm. I accepted. When I arrived, everyone greeted me with restrained civility. The children ran to hug me. That part still felt real. For a brief moment, surrounded by laughter and food and old memories, I almost felt human again. But then I saw the way Aisha's father looked at me, not with anger, but disappointment. That look pierced deeper than any insult could. I realized then that forgiveness, if it ever came, wouldn't erase what I'd done. Some wounds heal, but the scars stay forever. After dinner, as I was leaving, Aisha walked me to the gate. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "I don't hate you anymore, but I'll never understand why you did it." I wanted to answer, to give her a reason, but I didn't have one. All I could say was, "I'm sorry." She nodded slowly. "I know. she said. But sorry doesn't bring back trust. As I drove away, I realized that was the real punishment. Not losing her, but knowing that even if she forgave me someday, I could never forgive myself. Life after betrayal is not dramatic. It's monotonous. It's quiet. It's waking up every day with the memory of what you destroyed and learning to live with it. People think guilt fades with time. It doesn't. It just becomes part of you, like an old scar that aches when the weather changes. And yet, somehow I kept going. I worked. I visited the kids. I tried to be present even if I could never be whole again. Maybe that's what redemption really is. Not being forgiven, but learning to carry your sins without letting them destroy what's left. It's been 4 years since everything fell apart. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Sometimes it feels like last week. The mind plays tricks with guilt. It stretches and shrinks time at will. I've rebuilt a sort of life now. Work, rent, routine. From the outside, I look steady. But every day, in small, invisible ways, I still live with the echoes of that mistake. I moved to a smaller apartment near the city's edge. There's a park across the street where I take morning walks. I often see couples sitting on benches, talking softly, hands intertwined. I wonder if they realize how fragile what they have really is, how easily love can turn into negligence and negligence into betrayal. I've spent a lot of time thinking about why I did it. There was no single reason, no one moment of madness. It was a slow erosion of communication, of gratitude, of presence. I stopped appreciating what I had, and when someone new paid attention, I mistook that spark for salvation. The truth is simpler and uglier. I was selfish. I wanted excitement without consequences, affection without responsibility. Therapy helped me see things I hadn't wanted to face. My counselor once asked, "When did you stop being honest? With yourself, not with your wife?" That question stayed with me. I realized dishonesty doesn't begin with lies to others. It begins with lies to yourself. The comforting illusions that justify the first step across the line. The first year after the divorce was the hardest. I tried dating once, but the moment I felt someone trusting me, I panicked. I didn't deserve to be trusted, so I withdrew again. I learned to sit with my solitude, to let it teach me. Solitude, when you stop fighting it, can be a stern but honest teacher. Aisha and I still speak, mostly about the children. She's cordial, even kind. I think she's finally found peace, maybe even happiness. She doesn't talk about her personal life, and I don't ask. Every time I see her, I'm reminded of what strength really looks like. Quiet, composed, unyielding. The children are growing fast. My daughter turned 12 this year. She's thoughtful and perceptive, more than I wish she were. One night, during a weekend visit, she asked, "Dad, why did you and Mom stop loving each other?" I froze. There are no clean answers to that. I told her, "We didn't stop loving. We just forgot how to take care of that love." She nodded slowly, as if she partly understood. I don't know if that was the right thing to say, but it was the truth as I see it now. I still see Sarah sometimes, not in person, but in my thoughts. A passing song, a certain perfume, a street corner we used to drive by. And she's there, like a ghost. I heard she remarried last year. When I found out, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Maybe she finally found peace, too. We were two drowning people who mistook each other for lifeboats. I hope she's learned to swim again. Forgiveness is a strange thing. It's not one big moment. It's 1,000 small ones. It's the slow softening of shame, the willingness to let go of self-hatred without excusing the sin. I'm still somewhere in that process, learning to live with the memory without letting it define me entirely. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if that day in the cafeteria I had just smiled at Sarah and walked away. One decision, one heartbeat, and my entire life might have been different. But that's the thing about choices. You only see their weight once they've crushed you. I've learned that the true consequence of betrayal isn't being caught. It's what happens afterward, when you realize you've lost not just the people who loved you, but the person you were before the lie. Rebuilding that person is a long, painful process, but I'm trying. Slowly. I volunteer now on weekends at a counseling center that helps couples in crisis. I don't tell them my story, not directly, but sometimes, when I see a husband's eyes filled with the same restlessness I once had, I find ways to warn him. Talk before it's too late, I tell them, because silence is where infidelity begins. One evening, after a session, I sat alone in my car watching the sunset. The sky was bleeding orange and violet, and I realized something. Remorse can break you, but it can also rebuild you differently. Humbler, gentler, more aware of the quiet sanctity of trust. Maybe that's the only redemption some of us ever get. I still visit the old neighborhood occasionally. Aisha's house looks warm from the outside, lights glowing, laughter spilling from the windows. I never go in. I just stand across the street for a moment, listening. Then I leave. It's not longing anymore. It's acceptance. That life belongs to her now. People often say time heals everything. I don't believe that. Time doesn't heal. It teaches. It teaches you how to carry pain without letting it poison you. It teaches you to live with the emptiness, to recognize beauty in small, ordinary mercies. A morning walk, a child's laughter, a quiet evening with no lies. If there's one truth my affair taught me, it's this. Desire is fleeting, but integrity is forever. Once lost, it takes years to rebuild, and even then, the cracks remain. You can learn to live with them, but they never completely disappear. Sometimes when the night is still, I whisper a small prayer, not for forgiveness, but for wisdom. The wisdom to never again mistake attention for affection, excitement for love, loneliness for emptiness. Because now I know that the real test of love isn't how it begins, but how faithfully it's kept when life turns dull and ordinary. And that's my reckoning. The quiet knowledge that I broke something precious and spent years learning how not to break again. I can't undo the past, but I can honor its lesson every single day. Never trade lasting peace for momentary fire. The fire dies, the ashes remain.